The conflict begins, the opium trade and its consequences. The British strategy of selling opium to China proved financially lucrative, but it had disastrous effects on Chinese society. The opium trade created a significant public health crisis, with addiction becoming rampant, particularly in urban areas. The addiction epidemic weakened China's workforce, drained the country's silver reserves, and caused widespread social unrest. The Qing government recognized the dangers of opium and took steps to curb its importation and use. However, local officials often turned a blind eye to the trade, either because they were bribed by smugglers or because they too were addicted to the drug. By the 1830s, the opium crisis had reached a breaking point. The Chinese government, under the leadership of Emperor Daoguang, appointed a determined and moralistic official named Lin Zexu to combat the opium trade. Lin took a hardline approach, arresting Chinese opium dealers and confiscating large quantities of the drug. In 1839, he made a bold move that would ignite the conflict. He ordered the seizure and destruction of more than 20,000 chests of opium, over 1,000 tons, belonging to British merchants in the port city of Canton, now Guangzhou. This act, while intended to protect China from further harm, enraged the British, who saw it as an assault on their trade rights and property. The First Opium War, Britain's military response. In response to Lin Zexu's actions, the British government, pressured by influential opium traders and the British East India Company, decided to take military action. The First Opium War, 1839 to 1842, began when a British naval force arrived in China and engaged Chinese defenses. The British, armed with advanced weaponry and naval technology, easily overpowered the Chinese forces. The Qing military, which relied on traditional methods of warfare, was no match for the industrialized might of the British Empire. One of the key battles of the First Opium War was the Battle of Chuenpi in 1841, where British forces decisively defeated the Chinese Navy. The British employed iron-hulled steamships, which were far more advanced than China's wooden warships, giving them a significant advantage in naval engagements. Additionally, the British used their superior artillery to bombard Chinese coastal defenses and blockade key ports, crippling China's ability to sustain the war effort. The war reached its climax in August 1842, when British forces captured the city of Nanking, now Nanjing. With their capital under threat and no viable means of resistance, the Qing government was forced to negotiate peace. The resulting Treaty of Nanking, signed on August 29, 1842, was the first of what would become known as the unequal treaties imposed on China by Western powers. The Treaty of Nanking, a humiliating defeat. The Treaty of Nanking marked the end of the First Opium War, but it also marked the beginning of a period of deep humiliation for China. Under the terms of the treaty, China was forced to cede the island of Hong Kong to Britain, open 5 key ports to British trade: Canton, Shanghai, Ningbo, Fuzhou, and Xiamen, and pay a large indemnity to cover Britain's war costs. The treaty also granted British citizens extraterritorial rights, meaning they were subject to British law, rather than Chinese law while in China. The Treaty of Nanking effectively undermined China's sovereignty and opened the door for further foreign encroachment. Other Western powers, including France and the United States, soon demanded similar privileges, further weakening China's control over its own territory and trade. Despite the end of the war, the opium trade continued, and the social and economic problems that had plagued China before the conflict remained unresolved. The Second Opium War, continued conflict and further humiliation. The First Opium War was not the end of the conflict between China and the West. In 1856, tensions flared once again in what would become the Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860, also known as the Arrow War. This conflict began when Chinese authorities boarded a Chinese-owned but British-registered ship, the Arrow, on suspicion of piracy and smuggling. The British used the incident as a pretext to launch another military campaign against China, this time with the support of France. The Second Opium War saw even greater foreign intervention in China's affairs. British and French forces captured key cities, including Canton and Tianjin, and advanced toward Beijing. In 1860, the British and French troops sacked and burned the old summer palace, Yuan, in Beijing, an act of cultural destruction that symbolized the utter humiliation of the Qing dynasty. The war ended with the signing of the Treaty of Tientsin in 1858 and the Convention of Peking in 1860, both of which imposed even harsher terms on China than the Treaty of Nanking. Under these new treaties, China was forced to open more ports to foreign trade, legalize the opium trade, and allow foreign diplomats to reside in Beijing. The British also secured a lease on the Kowloon Peninsula, expanding their control over the Hong Kong area. The Qing dynasty's authority was further eroded, and China's status as a great power was severely diminished. Long-term consequences: the century of humiliation. The Opium Wars and the subsequent treaties had far-reaching consequences for China, both immediately and in the long term. The wars marked the beginning of what is often referred to as China's century of humiliation, a period from the mid-19th century to the mid-20th century during which China was subjected to foreign domination, internal strife, and social upheaval. The Opium Wars exposed the weaknesses of the Qing dynasty and contributed to a growing sense of disillusionment among the Chinese people. The Qing government's inability to protect the country from foreign aggression, combined with its failure to address the internal problems caused by the opium trade, led to widespread unrest. This unrest culminated in a series of major rebellions, including the Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864, which was one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. The treaties that ended the Opium Wars also opened China to further exploitation by foreign powers. Over the next several decades, China would be forced to sign more unequal treaties with Western nations and Japan, ceding additional territory and privileges. This loss of sovereignty and territorial integrity contributed to the eventual downfall of the Qing dynasty in 1912 and the rise of revolutionary movements that sought to modernize China and restore its strength. The legacy of the Opium Wars. Lessons for today. The legacy of the Opium Wars is still felt in China today. The memory of these wars and the subsequent foreign domination has left a deep scar on Chinese national consciousness. The term century of humiliation is often invoked in discussions of modern Chinese foreign policy, as China seeks to reassert itself as a global power and avoid the mistakes of the past. The Opium Wars also serve as a reminder of the devastating impact of drug addiction, imperialism, and unequal power dynamics in international relations. Hong Kong, which was ceded to Britain as a result of the Opium Wars. Thank you for exploring the history of the Opium Wars with us. If you enjoyed learning about this critical moment in history and want to discover more fascinating events from the past, make sure to hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our latest videos. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one.